Daddy, what are you doing?
We're recording a podcast.
Who's listening?
Islander fans are listening.
Where are they?
Well, they're right here.
Welcome to the Isles Faithful Podcast with your host, Michael Sherline.
Welcome back to the Isles Faithful Podcast. I am your host, as always, Michael Sherline, and this is episode 28. Today is March 18th, 2019, and joining me once again, is Arthur Staple of The Athletic. Art, how's it going?
I'm good, Mike. How are you?
Doing well. Like I was talking to you a minute ago, I'm heading out on vacation tomorrow, so I'm looking forward to that. Wanted to get another podcast out before we shuffled off, so here we are. I'm liking what I'm seeing from the team the last couple of games. I'm sure that you've been pretty happy. You've had some good positive things to write about.
Yeah, it's I think just over the last week, it's not always the prettiest, but I think when you drill down a little bit, they're generating scoring chances for sure. It's it's the time of year where goalies are playing a little bit better, and other teams are doing what the Islanders have done for most of the year, which is kind of clog the shooting lanes and box people out. And there's extra effort, especially from the teams they've been facing. And I think maybe the most important thing for the Islanders this past week was they beat Columbus, who's trying to get into the playoffs. They beat Montreal, also trying to get into the playoffs. Lose a game to Detroit they definitely shouldn't have lost to anyone else, and Detroit is one of the three worst teams in the league. And then maybe beat a team in Minnesota that they probably shouldn't have. But again, another team that's desperately trying to get in the playoffs. So that's a good sign for the Islanders that they're able to raise their level against teams that are probably more desperate than they are. It's just human nature. The Islanders are in a little bit more of a comfortable position, even though nothing is secure yet. But yeah, definitely some encouraging signs from the past week that maybe it slipped a little bit over the previous couple of weeks.
We'll go into goaltending a little more in depth in a minute. I have obviously a couple of questions primed and ready to go here. I wanted to really focus on, their mentality and the way that, like you just mentioned, they've been a little comfortable because the Islanders over the past couple of seasons haven't really been afforded the luxury of being comfortable, or at least playing with the fact that they're first in the Metro, and we're first in the Metro for almost 2 months, right? So this is kind of like uncharted territory for a lot of the team, and a lot I'm sure has to do with obviously the defensive play of that Barry Trotz is installed, the clutch goaltending. Because when was the last time the Islanders had two goaltenders playing out of their minds like Thomas Greiss and Robin Leonard have? So I wanted to talk a little about Barry Trotz and how important it is for a guy like him to come in, especially going deep into the playoffs the last couple of years with the Capitals and ultimately winning a Stanley Cup. So has he been priming the Islanders here for the last couple of months and maybe like showing them that they need to, as much as they need to play hard for the whole season for long stretches, has he been showing them that it's important to maybe hold off a little bit and to pace themselves for the stretch run?
I don't know about that. I think the message from him, and certainly the message from inside the room, is that there's no, it's 10 points between them and being out of the playoffs. I know now with just 10 games to go, it looks pretty good, but that's kind of the way it was for the last 3 weeks or so. And they're just, I think he recognizes this team is not built on enough skill to be able to turn it on and off whenever they need to. And they obviously learned that lesson over kind of the blah second part of February and beginning of March. They had, they're built on will and determination and working together and all that other stuff that you hear lots of coaches talk about. But to be honest, even you just look a few years in the past, the 14-15 and 15-16 teams had enough firepower to do that. They both kind of faltered down the stretch, but those were 100-point teams that, pretty securely made the playoffs. It took to the last weekend in 15-16. It took a little before that. And then, the disappointing last game of the year where they lost home ice. But those were solid playoff teams with high scoring guys and enough skill to overcome a dreary night. This is not that kind of team, and I think Barry Trotz recognized it early on. And I think uh, in researching the long piece I did about him when he got to 800 wins, talking to some guys from his very first team in Nashville and a few guys who played further along in those Nashville days, and then guys in Washington. When he comes in, he's prepared and he's determined. He said, you set the standard from very early on and say, this is the way we're going to play. And if you don't want to do it, you can let me know now, or you'll let me know by how you contribute, and we'll move on from you. So I think maybe this team looked a lot more like those Nashville teams that were very filled with third line guys and third pair defensemen from everybody else's scrap heap, but managed to compete every night because of the way that he set them up. And I think this team, with the low expectations that everybody had for them, I think they were craving someone to come in and put that discipline and that structure in, and with a lot of veteran guys who know how to play that way. It's just worked. But I think also, it's natural to have a few stretches of mediocrity in there, or not being able to compete as hard as you can. But I think this last week, like we said, and these next couple weeks coming up are important for them, because there's no pacing themselves with this group. You start to slip a little bit and you drop down the standings. You end up not getting home ice. You end up maybe getting a division winner instead of being a division winner yourselves. So yeah, I think the message has been pretty consistent that nobody takes their foot off the pedal with this group.
All right, I'm maybe should have rephrased my question maybe a little different. But I'm glad to hear that it seems that everybody is on the same page and they are really buying into the system. It seems, and when they stick to the structure and they stick to the game plan and they play Islander hockey, which is funny because Barry has adopted what some of the previous coaches have been saying, at least over the course of the time that I covered the team, about Islanders hockey. So it's good to see. Now, Casey Cizikas, how injured is he? Not that we really are going to know, or you're really going to know. And you think they're going to shut him down here down the stretch because he's such an important piece to that fourth line, especially moving into the most important time of the year, and that's the playoffs.
Yeah, I don't, your guess is as good as mine. It's sort of, I wasn't at the games over the weekend on the road. It seemed like he was trying to play through something that he wasn't really, his body wouldn't allow him to in the warm-ups in Detroit. And obviously, you're not going to throw him right back in there the next night. So yeah, I don't think they're going to give him much. This is their playoffs as far as they're concerned. And I think the time that Cizikas has missed, when he missed a couple games with the flu, and this little stretch, you can see how much it hurts their group. And it's not just because he's got 19 goals and he's having his best year as an Islander. That line, when it's together and everybody's healthy enough to play, is super effective, and they've been incredibly consistent this year. It's quite surprising. You expect those three guys to maybe positionally have some breakdowns, not be as relentless. They always had energy, 4 and 5 years ago, but they weren't always channeling it in the right direction and would get out of position to make hits sometimes. That hasn't happened. Maybe there's a game or two of the games they've all been in, but not that many. And and not having Cizikas, I think I mentioned it on Twitter a lot, that the center depth is really, really weak in this organization. Fans are already asking, when does Otto Koivula come up? And I'm like, this is a guy who's probably not even done growing. He's so young and playing, he's played 20 games or 25 games at center in the AHL. So he's not a solution, and there's really no other solutions down there. And obviously they've got some guys like Leo Komarov who can fill in, or Josh Bailey, or Anthony Beauvillier, but there's a reason those guys play the wing regularly. They're not necessarily Trotz's preferred centers. And he had to kind of pull Komarov out of the game on Saturday and double shift Matthew Barzal, because Komarov he doesn't fit well with those guys on that line. I think really we've seen all season long, God love him, but Komarov is Val Filppula's wing, and he doesn't really work very many other places. So I think if Cizikas feels well enough to play, he's going to play unless it's a kind of injury that he might injure it further if he plays. But I think even at 75 or 80%, Cizikas is an important piece in there, and I think he'll certainly there's no keeping him out if he feels well enough to play, and I don't think Barry Trotz is looking to rest anybody yet because nothing has been secured.
I can see that. I'm definitely fully aware of what he brings to that line, and you know, when one of the three is out, they're obviously it's like they're off and they're missing like an appendage almost. So the way that they just kind of know where each other are and feed off their own energy that they create is fantastic. Although Clutterbuck did look very good the other night against the Wild. I thought Matt Martin looked pretty good too. Unfortunately, he took that early penalty and they kind of struggled to get a little momentum later on in the first period because of it. And I don't even really want to go into the rest of the penalties in that game because it just seemed like every time they sneezed or breathed, they were getting called for a penalty.
Yeah, it was a curiously officiated game considering most of the games we've seen the last couple weeks. Each team gets one or two power plays, maybe three if it's a little bit more lopsided. But yeah, all the calls early in the game, and then the curious lack of calls. I think the Barzal breakaway was kind of the one where I was most scratching my head. Where Spurgeon did a nice job to hustle back, but it's a slash on a guy's leg. If there was a set play inside the zone 5-on-5 and there was that he made that kind of slash, that's an obvious call. So you'd think on a breakaway it would be cause maybe for a penalty shot, and almost ended up causing Matthew Barzal to get hurt because he went crashing into the post pretty hard. But yeah, the Islanders have been pretty calm in those kinds of circumstances. I think we don't have to think back too far into the Doug Wade era, a guy who regularly blew his stack on the bench, even when he was an assistant coach. And I think it hurt the Islanders standing with the refs from time to time. And certainly last year, when you saw a lot of wild gesticulating from the bench from Doug, it leaked over to the players on the bench. And I think, that's the reason that Barry Trotz stays very calm. He does have his conversations with the officials, but he doesn't get out of sorts. He doesn't raise his voice. And I think his players have carried that forward. And that's been it's a big component for a team that plays the way that the Islanders do. If they start to put their energy into the wrong places, it could get ugly fast, and we've certainly seen that in the past as well. So kudos to them for keeping it in and letting the fans rant and rave on Twitter, and they came away with 2 points.
I feel bad for you. I feel bad for Compton too. Sometimes it just seems you guys get the short end of the stick there with the angst of Isles Twitter, but you guys kind of take it in stride. And ever since you've been at the Athletic, you've got a little bit more freedom in that sense to kind of to chirp us back and you know dabble in the opinion department towards teams above the 49th there that will remain nameless.
Yeah, well, we do have a big contingent up in Toronto, and I think it kind of started with that first Islanders Leafs game after Christmas when I wrote a story about Matt Martin going back to play up there. The comments on the Athletic started to resemble Twitter a little bit, and I think that's a good sign for us. That means our subscriber base is widening into the realm of people who are so passionate as hockey fans that they want to start mixing it up a little bit more. And ever since, I think really, just the way that the Islanders have played, there's been a lot of conversations with other, fans of other teams dipping in, whether it's on Twitter or in the comments of my stories. And, I think that's a good thing. It shows that people are either a little worried about the Islanders or angry that they're doing so well, especially since Tavares left. So, those are all good things. And as far as Twitter goes, I think we all start to understand over the years that as long as you take it as people venting, not necessarily things they'd say to you face to face, and it's just a way to blow off steam. And certainly since July 1, which was kind of the biggest blow off steam session Islander fans have had, maybe in my entire time being on Twitter, it makes it a little easier to handle when you just sort of let people pop off and don't take everything quite so literally or seriously.
I want to not to completely cut this conversation off because it's an important part of obviously what you do, obviously what I do, because I don't do much, in the way of writing all that often these days. But we'll go back to Matt Barzell and Barry Trotz because I tend to look, to go back to what you said about Doug Waite with the gesticulation, which is one of my favorite words. I always tend to, on the broadcast, look to see what his reaction is going to be. And it's obviously very different compared to even going back to Jack Capuano. And you'll look and Barry has such a rapport with the officials that you could tell he's having like a legitimate conversation, or sometimes he'll even like laugh in the middle of being angry because he's pissed off. You have to know that. And it obviously, like you said, carries over to the players and especially the lettered players on the team, are gonna obviously go out there and do what they need to do for the officials in that regard. But I've been noticing the last maybe month, 2 months, because Matt Barzal draws so many penalties, and then maybe he'll have like 4, 5, 6 calls, sometimes on the same shift, go without being whistled. He'll stay down a little longer. He'll cover his face and kind of feign being injured a little bit. Is that really out of his own frustration, or is it just like something that he, as a player, just has to grow through, to try to find his own way?
I think it's a little like, a second year NBA player who's not going to get any calls. I think it's part of the process. It's not necessarily a conscious thing among officials, and I'm sure Islander fans would disagree. But I think he's learning to, live with the attention that from the other teams, certainly that he started to get towards the end of last year, but not the commensurate respect that maybe a Sidney Crosby has. And I think Crosby's probably a good person to mention because Crosby, his first couple of years, developed a reputation as a bit of a whiner. Started begging for calls, and I think even the most unhappy Islander fan and the most angry Islander fan in terms of the Penguins and Crosby can acknowledge that the last 4 or 5 years, you don't really see too much from Sid anymore because he gets a lot of calls, A and B, and I think he's matured. He understands that you're not going to get every call, and when you're a star player and you have the puck a lot, you're going to get a lot of attention, and he can still do what he does. For Barzal, I think that's still a little bit of a ways off, and I'm sure him speaking up to the refs or doing that, like you said, staying down a little bit longer. Lots of officials in lots of sports can interpret that as being shown up, and nobody reacts well to that. Officials, most of all. So I think, it's been a little bit of, maybe him getting a reputation as a guy who's trying to get calls, even though, like you said, there's certainly plenty of occasions where he is legitimately held up or cross-checked or all those other things. And I think you just look at the numbers. He drew 29 penalties last year at 5-on-5. Maybe it was 30. I think I looked it up the other day, which was third in the league. This year, 15. And I think his ice time is up. He certainly got the puck maybe more than he had last year because he's the main guy. So it's definitely something to adjust to, and maybe it's also the reputation of the team. He's not on a team with John Tavares anymore. He's not on a team where he's scoring, putting up 5-point games, and the refs want to make sure he's getting the calls that he deserves. This is a low-scoring, grinding team now, so maybe they're not ready to see what he does and make those kind of calls. You're looking for reasons why, but I think basically what it comes down to is it's a second-year player. If he's the sort of guy who pops off, and he certainly does, he's an emotional guy. Officials, they talk to each other. They know, they watch all the games around the league. They can see that he's still a young guy who maybe hasn't earned the right to speak up like that to officials. This has been a learning year for him on that front, and certainly if you couple it with the learning that he's been doing by playing under Barry Trotz and not being quite as freewheeling as he was last year and inattentive to the defensive side, it's not the most impressive point total, but given what the Islanders' offense is and how much of it runs through him, it's been a pretty good year. And I think the last week or so that, like we've been talking about since he was back with Anders Lee and Jordan Eberle, that line has really generated a lot, and I think they've been a puck hop or an inch or so away from a few more goals.
It's funny, I led you down this path because I wanted to bring up the article you wrote today about, Matt Barzal, and the fact that Barzal is with Eberle and Lee and the line has been working out over the last couple of games. Number 1, what took Barry so long to reunite this line? As much as he didn't see them play together last year, aside from, maybe when the Capitals played the Islanders. So what took them so long to put them together? And what have you seen out of Matt Barzal change this year over last year, aside from, what you wrote today in The Athletic?
Well, I think what took him so long is, I get the sense that Trotz is not a coach who likes to juggle lines very much. Even in games where they're completely out of sorts, he'll do it for a shift or two, but that's about it. So I think having Brock Nelson, between those two guys for pretty much the bulk of the season, was these are my three. These are three of my veteran guys. These are the guys I'm going to match up a lot with. I'm going to, they're decent puck possession guys. Nelson's much better on faceoffs than Barzal is, and I think a lot of it is the not breaking Barzal down to build him back up, but to disabuse him of the habits that he learned last year. And I think playing with those guys is a bit of a reward, and you have to be able to show you can do what the coach wants you to do. And I think it was like I described in the article. It was Trotz was much more pleased about the winning goal against Montreal because it started with a defensive zone play with a good position and good anticipation, a good physical play by Barzal to knock Max Domi off the puck, and then Domi falls down, and he's off to the races, and then he does what he does. But Trotz was much more excited about how it all began than how it, obviously how it finished was huge too. But I think those are the sorts of things that he wants to see, and you get rewarded as a young guy to be like that. So, I think what it's been like for Barzal this year, he's certainly, I've written probably 4 stories at different stages of the season where he said a lot of similar things to what he said to me the other night about this is, winning is what it's all about. And with a young guy like that, sometimes you think, is he trying to convince himself along with me that this is what's most important to him, or does he really mean it? And I'm sure that those are conversations that he and Trotz have had throughout the year. There have definitely been times where he gets into the zone and he circles and circles and there's nothing happening, and a couple of puck dribbles off his stick or things like that. And I think when you see that, or when the fans see that, they think, oh, he's trying to do too much. And maybe that's true. But I think the key for him is that he's still gaining the zone. He's still backing guys off. I think it certainly highlights the fact that there's just not a lot of skill on the wings to go around. He had Anthony Beauvillier and Josh Bailey with him for a while. They've tried a few other guys, Andrew Ladd. This is a team that's crying out for an elite winger to play alongside him. And there is a guy who's probably going to be available on July 1, who's currently toiling for the Blue Jackets, who could be that guy. And that would be an amazing partnership and would probably change some things that Barry Trotz, is trying to do with this team going into year 2. But if they can't get Artemi Panarin, there's plenty of other guys out there that it would be an upgrade, and that's not a huge knock on Bailey and Beauvillier. Josh Bailey's back above 50 points, but I don't think a lot of people thought would happen with Tavares gone. And Beauvillier's had a very up and down year, but he's within shouting distance of 20 goals if he can turn it on down the stretch here. So they're not totally bereft, but definitely, to find someone who can react to what Barzal does with his unpredictability is difficult, and I think most of the downsides of this season for Barzal has shown that like in a lot of other areas, that they need to upgrade their top 6 in a pretty significant way after this year.
All right. Hopefully they do wind up with a Artemi Panarin, because I think that would be a huge get. And I know you've floated a couple of names over the last couple of weeks and close to the trade deadline there, so it's definitely going to be an exciting off season once we get through the playoffs, which look like it's, becoming more and more of a certainty here as the season progresses and winds down. So I'm excited for that, and I can't wait for that. Now I want to talk a little bit about the power play. Obviously, there's been some line juggling there. Finally, as we spoke about previously, didn't seem like Barry likes to juggle his lines all that often, but now it seems as much as they only have one power play goal over the last, 10,000 games, it seems. They've been generating chances and they've been scoring right as the power play's been expiring. So, they've been close and they've been keeping it in the zone and moving it around and really getting into the front of the net and the slot where it drives me bananas. I'm sure it drives everybody else bananas when they pass around the perimeter the whole time. Because I've said numerous times on this podcast, the opposition is going to just want you to pass around the zone. Okay. Pass it around the perimeter the whole entire 2 minutes. I don't care as long as you don't get a shot on goal. And for all intents and purposes, they hadn't been really shooting for large stretches of the power play. So they're definitely going to the danger zones, getting some high danger scoring chances. And like we saw the other night, Lee's been going to the front of the net. They've been getting some shots through, maybe picking the right lanes and the right times to kind of open things up. So it's good to see. So why don't we talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think the switch away, the switch of Nick Leddy and Devon Taves on the top unit seems to help a lot. He's just a smoother player, whether it's passing or, he always seems to be in a ready position. And that's, I assume, Nick Leddy's an elite skater, Devon Taves is an elite skater, but Taves seems to have that, the head up, the sticks up. He just seems to know where he's going with it. And Nick looks a little bit less sure of himself. And I think you saw that on the power play goal the other night, that he's just, it was a quick little give and go with Nelson, and they're still, both forwards are out there in position, and he just snapped it through. And, I think one of the small changes that they're trying to make is to get Anders Lee a little bit further away from the net, which, just to be in that kind of bumper spot that a lot of power plays use now. Not necessarily as a distributor, but as to kind of draw people away so that you can get, whether it's Eberle or Barzal, whoever's kind of that guy along the goal line into for rebounds and things like that. I think the main issue, and it's similar to what we touched on talking about Barzal and his line mates, there's just not enough skill to go around on this team. And skill is obviously, that's the power play is when you can benefit the most from having really skilled guys. They had Tavares in that off wing shooting spot for so long. You took it for granted that they'd find somebody to put in there because you still had Barzal, and you realized from early on, even think back to Josh Bailey with that one-timer 4-on-3 OT winner in Carolina. You thought, oh, maybe this is the guy, but Josh is not a shooter, and I think he's shown that over the season. Brock Nelson's there. Brock has a great wrist shot off the rush, but that's not a shot you can take in that spot. You need to be a quick release type of guy. That's not his thing. He seems like he needs it in the perfect spot to let it go, and it's not terribly heavy. So that's the thing to think about too with the idea of Panarin. You add Panarin, and obviously you don't know if Jordan Eberle's going to stay around or not. I would think not if they brought in Panarin, even though he plays the left side at 5-on-5. But that's, three guys potentially on the top power play unit who are all righties. And you need some guys to be in that shooting position. Panarin likes to shoot from the off wing circle. He's a righty. Where does Matthew Barzal go in that case? I think it's a good problem to have, but it's one to think about, that adding Panarin to that power play maybe doesn't solve things. And you can look at Columbus because their power play stinks and has stunk the entire time Panarin's been there. So maybe it's not a one-person solution. So I imagine that in the off season they'll Barry is not a guy to sit still, and obviously I think the fans tend to misdirect their anger at Scott Gomez, thinking this is like having a hitting coach or a receivers coach or something. It's like hockey doesn't work like that. The head coach signs off on everything. Everybody's in all the meetings. It's not a Scott Gomez production, believe me. He may draw up some things, but Barry Trotz is involved, and Lane Lambert's involved, and John Gruden's involved. So if they have a solution to come up with in the offseason, I'm sure it will depend on their personnel. But I think even you look at the second unit and you see what Cal Clutterbuck does in kind of that bumper shooting spot in the lane there, within 15 feet of the net. If Cal Clutterbuck had a little more skill, he'd probably be leading the team in power play goals because he's got the quick release and he's got a shooter's mentality. And you really see the problem with that top unit, whether it's Eberle and Barzal exchanging spots, holding onto the puck. The only real shooter they've got is Anders Lee, and he's in too tight, and you're not going to take that big body and his ability to deflect pucks away from there. So, what this team needs to really be good on the power play is a lefty shooter on that off wing spot to give them a real threat. They don't have it now. They may not have it by next year, even if Panarin signs up. So it'll be interesting to see how they can solve that problem. But I think the main thing that they can do is keep Devon Taves there. A lot of people have called for Ryan Pulock, and I think Barry tried to explain it the other day rather ineloquently that putting Pulock on that top unit means you'd have to take away probably Eberle. But if Barzal's the guy that has the puck all the time, you can't have two righties that are standing on one side of the ice, Pulock waiting for the one-timer and Barzal trying to operate from a similar spot. It just doesn't work. So I think that's the reason he's been so reluctant to make that change. And then, like I said, they don't have a lefty who's a big bomber. So Taves is the closest thing they got. They'll probably ride with him since he seems to be gaining confidence there, and hope that they get a couple more bounces and guys get a little bit more, feeling like the puck's going to go off them and go in, or making some more crisp plays. And power plays in the postseason. I can think back to the Bruins in 2011. I don't think they had a power play goal in the entire 7-game series in the finals, and they still managed to win. So it can be done. Probably not an ideal situation, or maybe they'll completely turn it around and turn it on when they get to the postseason. Who knows?
You beat me to the punch because I was going to bring up Boston and that power play there that they had on their cup run. And like we've said numerous times, the postseason is a completely different animal, and power play chances are going to be few and far between because it's a different type of hockey. Things are definitely tightened up and more defensive, and they tend to allow the gregarious stuff to be called. So they want nice games and physical games, and that's just playoff hockey. So you never know what's going to happen, unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on your viewpoint. And I said at the start of this, I do like the way their power play is progressing here over the last couple of games. And it seems like everybody involved definitely has more confidence. And I know, everyone kind of gets on Eberle a little bit, but I feel like he's been playing some of his best hockey as of late. And same for Clutterbuck too on the power play. I think that he's been, and I didn't really agree with this earlier in the season. I think he's kind of been a clutch player there, and maybe not really generating the amount of chances that we would like, but he definitely gives them a different look and a different threat when he's out there.
Yeah, and I think they've kind of tried some guys there. I think Val Filppula, when he's having a good game and he's feeling energetic, he's a help to that power play because he's good at puck retrieval, and he's got good vision around the zone. And obviously Pulock is a huge benefit. I think he's going to have to add some things to his arsenal to be a more effective power play player, and to not. He certainly shows at 5-on-5. He's got the ability to be shifty in the offensive zone, to fake that big shot and get people off their feet and move around. And that'll come. He's still a young guy, and he's certainly played like an elite defenseman the last couple seasons. So I don't have a lot of worries about him, but it's not quite there right now. So, and you've seen other guys, like I said, Bailey's kind of rotated in and out. Beauvillier has. It's not you have to have that attack mentality on the power play. And I think a lot of guys have maybe let somebody else do the attacking. We'll see what goes on here. And that's how you end up being 15% all year. And you look at some of the other teams that are down there with them, Montreal, Columbus. It's just it's a group of guys who don't necessarily have that attack mentality. And when you look at the good power plays, the Washingtons, the Pittsburghs, obviously the skill level of those individual guys they have on their top units is off the charts, and that certainly helps. And that's a big divide between them and the Islanders. But it's also, guys that have been together a long time. They know where they're going to be. This is a new coaching staff. This is a new style. There's some new players. There's going to be more new players next year. I don't ever think, and I don't think anybody was under any illusions that this was going to be a high scoring team. And the fact that they've been able to be so good / dominant at 5-on-5 pretty much all year long is absolutely necessary to where they've been, but also a reminder that this is not a team that's built on skill, and that's always going to hurt your power play.
I think the thing for me that I would like to see a little bit more of is the fast paced plays, quick passing, quick decisions with the puck. It always just seems like they wait or they hesitate that split second where if they would have just fired off a one timer, even if it's not really going to be 100% on net, just get the puck towards the net as quick as you can to try to generate out front, because they have got three guys kind of down low 90% of the time. So that's really where I start to yell at the TV, and then my wife yells at me, and then the kids will yell and whatever, like, why are you yelling? Well, watch the game. I'm telling you to watch the game. This is what I deal with every single day. Just shoot the puck. And that's so cliche, shoot the puck, but fire a puck off of a quick pass. That's all I'm asking for. And I think that's pretty much what Barry's been wanting for the whole season.
Yeah, I think they're obviously, the most effective passes are across that slot line, through the middle, getting the goalie moving side to side. You don't want to throw anything straight on unless you've got a good ability to deflect it. And they just, Barzal just likes to be too fine, I think, with his shots. He doesn't really change that up very much. And like I said, if you don't have somebody on that opposite side, on the off wing to just sort of crank it and get people moving and get pucks out in the slot on rebounds and things like that, it's just not going to work. And it's certainly an area where John Tavares excelled for a long, long time. He could beat guys standing still with that shot. He was so good with it, but also just he has that attack mentality and would be willing to shoot from just about anywhere just because he knew that would get people moving. And I think it's a mentality that still needs to come with the Islanders and probably will come with different personnel.
All right, moving on. We talked enough power play. This week, we obviously saw Thomas Greiss in a back-to-back situation for the first time in a couple of months here. How close is Robin Lehner? And it was just really a case of Thomas has been playing very good, so it was like a weird back-to-back with a late game following a very early game. You think they just gave him like an extra day's rest, or is he still kind of battling some of the after effects of that collision?
I mean, I would hope that he's not, because he shouldn't be dressed if that's the case. I would imagine that it's more like you said. It's a back to back. There's not not a full morning skate because of the early start out in Minnesota, the 5 o'clock start. I think there's just hesitation on Mitch Korn and Pierre Greco's part to drop Lehner back in, and with there being I think one more back-to-back next weekend when they're in Philly on Saturday and then home for Arizona. I think they felt like they had a day off coming today. I would imagine you're going to see Leonard tomorrow against Boston unless something's changed. And then you go into the weekend with, probably Greiss in Montreal, unless Leonard's feeling really good and plays out of his mind. You split him over the weekend, and then you kind of hit the reset button with a couple of days off after that. So, I think there's times when it's okay to go back to back with goalies. Not often, for sure, and the numbers certainly back that up. But in a situation like that, where you've got a goalie coming off any kind of injury, and especially a head injury, where he doesn't get to be on the ice very much between games, and to be honest, the back 40 minutes of that game in Detroit, Greiss didn't see a whole lot. He was a little busy in the third period, but certainly not the last half of it, when the Islanders seemed like they were just reloading and going back up the ice every time. So I think that's certainly the benefit of splitting the kind of having a 1A 1B type situation. You feel like we keep those back to back situations at bay, especially if you've got a guy who's already played 55 or 60. But these are both guys who are under 40. So you said, I'm sure the goalie coaches, nobody's going to put anybody in a dangerous situation, but I'm sure from the head coach's standpoint, it's, okay, here's your chance. We need somebody here right now, and we haven't taxed you too much, so get in there. And Grice was really good in Minnesota, and those back-to-back situations. Obviously, they'd split most of the rest of them, like you said. I think there was one other. They've been so good on the second half, and I'm sure having a fresh goalie has been the biggest factor in why they were, I guess, 10-1-1 or 11-1-1 in the second half of those back-to-backs this year. And yeah, he rose to the occasion. The goaltending has been, I know we haven't talked about it very much, but we certainly wouldn't be talking about playoffs if it wasn't for those two guys. And who would have thought that when they missed out on some of the bigger name guys that were available either via trade or in free agency, and ended up with Leonard on the 1-year deal. And then we heard, via our site all about his personal journey in the last year or so. I don't think anybody thought this was going to be a tandem that was pretty close to locking up a Jennings Trophy, and I don't think we've seen one of those around here pretty much ever. It's been pretty impressive.
They definitely hit a home run with the signing of Robin Leonard, and I know that was maybe not their first choice. It seemed to be whatever was left on the scrap heap. But you look at the way Carter Hutton has played in Buffalo, especially with the shaky Buffalo defense up there, and I know that he was a target of Lou Lamoriello early in free agency. So you never know. Maybe they're not having the type of season that they would have, or they are having, had they signed him over Robin Leonard. But in my eyes, Leonard has definitely earned at least talking about a contract extension, if not 100% receiving one here moving forward. So it's a feel good story. It's something I'm glad the Islanders as a team have been able to rally around, especially with everything he's been through. You always have to feel for a guy like that, because I brought this up, with you a couple weeks back, and then Brett Sergalis joined me last week, and I said the same thing. We always forget that these are human beings that just so happen to play a sport for money, and how many people would love to be in their shoes, or maybe not love to be in their shoes. But the human aspect of these players is something that has always interested me, maybe because I'm a player at a lower level myself, so I kind of understand maybe the aspect of the stresses of playing. And I'm not necessarily even saying that what I do is stressful at all. It's supposed to be fun. But again, these guys make millions of dollars to play a game that is fun for so many people. So that's just another little aspect that they have to deal with.
For sure. It's I think even when people hear about addiction issues, things like that, it definitely, the idea of the spoiled athlete comes into play. And I think in society we've learned about addiction and mental illness kind of going a lot more hand in hand than people were thinking about or willing to admit for a long time. And I think reading what he wrote, uh, you know, so eloquently and without really much input from us on the editing side, he had a lot going on in his mind, and was unable to really figure it all out for a lot of years. So yeah, it's impressive that he was able to open up and share that, on his first public day with a new organization, and then to go on from there and balance bipolar medication. You worry about stuff when a guy gets a concussion like he had. Does the medicine affect that? Is he worried about taking something wrong if he is, when he had a bit of a back problem? There's being on the road, as I wrote about, the first long road trip, how you manage that as a guy who spends a lot of time by yourself, and you can certainly go down some dark pathways when you spend as much time on the road alone. So yeah, it's just the way that he's navigated this season, in addition to putting up incredible numbers and playing so well and fitting in pretty seamlessly, has been it's been one of the more impressive displays I've seen in a long, long time. And certainly there's plenty of other guys who are much more private about whatever struggles they're going through. But to do all that and to field all the questions and talk very openly and easily about dealing with mental illness and dealing with substance abuse, is he's set a very good example, I think, for the modern day pro athlete.
And the fact that everybody, as far as fans and people around the league, have embraced him and his story, and he's taken to Islander fans also in his comments and his love for how loud Islander fans can be at Nassau Coliseum. It's fun to see, and the Islanders needed a character guy like him. You know, goaltenders are always quirky guys. Thomas Greiss is more of along the lines of serious in that respect. You know, you could tell he jokes around a little bit, but when he's in net, he's all business, and in interviews, he's all business. But Robin's got that personality where, you know, it, it seems like he's pretty outgoing for all the things that he's kind of struggled with, and you know, I'm happy to see that. It's such a good story. Like, I can't even just say that enough. How happy I am for him, and how the success is kind of helping him through this tough time for him.
No, I was just, I think that's where a guy like Barry Trotz and his personality, like I said, I learned a lot. It's very evident from the time that you first few times you deal with him, but hearing from players who played for him when he was a rookie head coach about picking up Tom Fitzgerald from the airport when he arrived in Nashville before their inaugural season, going to Halloween parties with the players, and just establishing that trust with the guys in the room, I think means a lot. And there's a lot of veteran guys that Lou Lamoriello brought in that made people scratch their heads on July 1, especially in the wake of losing Tavares, where Leo Komarov got too many years and too much money, but he's a guy who sits in the locker room for hours on end with Leonard, just jabbing back and forth at one another. And those are things that, people don't really care about, and maybe they shouldn't. But I think for the guys in the room, it means a lot, especially a guy like Leonard, to make him feel welcome and to, just have that camaraderie that isn't always there in every room. Because it's they're either too young or too distant, or too, success kind of breeds a lot of routines that don't want to be broken. So yeah, there's been a lot of factors, I think, that have gone into their success, and that may be one small part of it.
All right, so a couple more quick hits here before we get out of here. And Johnny Boychuk, are we going to see him over the next couple of games?
I mean, I'm sure he's healthy. Trotz has really turned that old, you don't lose your spot to injury cliche on its head here, with Ladd coming back from his lengthy recovery from knee surgery, and being in and out of the lineup until he seemed to be thrown back in for good in the last few games. And Thomas Hickey, missed a couple months with a concussion, and Devon Taves, he's not coming out of the lineup. So it was really a battle, I think, for some of the other guys to see whether they would be out. And Boychuk unfortunately got hurt. And now Hickey and Taves are really playing well. So, I don't think it's a bad thing for a 35-year-old guy to, especially coming off an injury that looked like it could have been a lot worse than it was, to take an extra few days to work on his conditioning, to reset a little bit for the playoffs, because they're going to need Boychuk in the playoffs for sure. So yeah, it's definitely been it's been interesting that I think we've come to assume in years past, coaches that don't quite have the same pedigree, when a veteran guy goes out, as soon as he's ready to go back in, he goes back in, and you make the tough decision with a younger player and take them out. Barry Trotz hasn't really done that, and that's definitely to his credit. He's got a good feel for what his best lineup is, and what their capabilities are. And I think a lot of people were certainly disappointed, and maybe not surprised, but disappointed when Taves went down after having a terrific training camp. And you saw Lucas Spiza in the opening night lineup, but it didn't take very long for them to realize what they had in Taves, and what, how much improved Scott Mayfield is. And it's been hard to argue here and there, certainly certain things. I'm sure we might talk about a certain former number 66, but as far as optimal lineups go, but it's hard to argue with the record they've put together that Trotz hasn't made all the right moves so far.
Couple more quick hits. Michael Dal Cole, you think we're going to see him inserted into the lineup here down the stretch run?
I wouldn't be surprised to see him go back to Bridgeport for some of their stretch run if he's not going to play here. I think that's having him around here has been kind of an interesting decision. I thought when when they converted his emergency recall to a regular recall, that meant that he was going to stay in the lineup. He didn't. He kind of had I think his last game was the Philly game, which was kind of a disaster for most of the guys on the team. And Andrew Ladd has been in there, and Andrew Ladd's a pro. He's clearly diminished in what he can do, especially offensively. But defensively, he's very smart positionally. He does a lot of little things that may go unnoticed by the casual fan. Dalcall, to me, still has a future with this team, and that's a far cry from where we were with him at the end of training camp. So credit to him. I would imagine that as we get down to the last few games here, where you've still got a few recalls left, it wouldn't kill them to send him back down and play a couple games in Bridgeport. And I imagine that's what'll happen if he's not going to get in the lineup. If he is going to get in the lineup, he's certainly shown himself to be an NHL player. I think there's still a little issues with confidence and holding onto the puck and trying to make plays, because we know he can make them. But yeah, I think he's been good, and I imagine that when the playoffs roll around, they'll want to have him here to throw in the lineup in case they need a little bit of a boost from some young legs.
So with his call up being switched from emergency to a full, they have 2 left, if I'm not mistaken. So you think they're going to utilize those moving forward to kind of bring some other players up to maybe get a taste, or you think they're just going to save them really for kind of depth moving into the playoffs?
Well, who'd you have in mind, Mike?
I don't know. I think there's a lot of people who would maybe think that there would be that number 66 or 26 or whatever the heck number he is now, maybe get another shot. Me personally, I don't really think he's shown much to warrant that type of responsibility, aside from that little stretch there by the trade deadline. But I, would maybe like to see what, like you had said earlier, what a Koivula can do, as much as he's only played 20 some odd games at center. I'm curious to see how his game translates to the NHL. He's just been one of those players that I've had my eye on for a while. And, maybe one of the younger defensemen or somebody like that, maybe call up for a little bit of depth. What are your thoughts?
I don't think they do that just to have it. If Bridgeport were dead in the water, I would say it's a possibility, but they're a playoff team too. So I don't think you're going to see Koivula this year, barring some major injuries. I think first year over in North America, it would be so out of character for Lou and Chris Lamoriello to just say, yeah, sure, he's playing great down here, we'll throw him right in. Maybe if the Islanders were where we all thought they were going to be this year, that maybe you reward him with a couple games, but even then it's just not their style. So I don't think you'll see him. Sebastian Aho is probably a guy who's deserving of a look, much more so than last year when he kind of lucked into that long stint that he had. But again, still a very young guy. I don't think there's any pressure to do that. Ho-Sang is probably the next guy up still, mostly because, other than the fact that he has had some good moments down there, as we've discussed a lot in the answers to a lot of your questions, they need scoring on the wing, and they need a guy who can make some things happen in that middle six set, and he's been able to do that from time to time, not consistently enough. So yeah, I'm not. I think if they get hit with a couple of big injuries, that changes things. But yeah, I don't imagine they're just gonna have guys around to have the experience. They're gonna have the guys that are in Bridgeport are gonna have a pretty good experience too. Most of them will be their first trip to the postseason at any level in North America. So that's been a good development from down there. I know they've gotten some good years, like we talked about. Ho-Sang, Dalcall's having a great year, Koivula, and some of their they're kind of like veteran pro guys. Steve Bernier's got 20 goals, and I don't think a lot of fans want to hear his name anymore. But frankly, Steve Bernier is a Lou guy and a Chris Lamoriello guy. So if there was a chance that the Islanders needed someone at their at kind of the bottom end of their roster in the playoffs, it wouldn't surprise me if he got a call over Josh Ho-Sang. I'm sure that's sacrilege for me to say, but that's the that's the way things work. You need guys with experience. Steve Bernier pretty much single-handedly eliminated the Rangers in 2012 for the Devils. So it's a long time ago, but he clearly still has something going. So yeah, I think Hosang is always going to be a hot button topic. I'm curious to see if he doesn't get a call up and we don't see him again before the end of the playoffs, what's going to happen with him. His entry level deal's up. I don't imagine they just kind of throw away people who are under control for a few more years. So I don't think he'll be going anywhere. But you never know. And I think for him, it'll be an interesting off season to get prepared if he's still in the organization, because he's had a bit of a roller coaster this year. Maybe thinking that he was in their plans and then not pretty quickly. And yeah, it's I'm definitely interested to see where things go with him this summer.
Well, we could probably spend a whole nother hour just on Josh Hosang talk by himself. So I will leave that for another time. We have to let a little bit of stuff go here for the sake of our listeners in the future. So now why don't we just close out with just a real quick thing over the next 10 games here, how you think the Islanders close out?
I think they'll get to 100 points. I don't know that they'll win the division. Washington does have Tampa twice in their last 10. The Islanders have a more consistently tough schedule with teams that are either on the cusp of the playoffs or safely in. And obviously starting tomorrow night with Boston, the team in the Bruins, it's kind of like what the Islanders aspire to be. The Bruins are just as stingy defensively and have a ton more skill, which is why I think the Bruins give them such fits. So but after that, there's some opportunities for them to pick up some points playing the way that they've been the last week. I think they'll get to 102, 103. I think they'll finish second. I think they'll get Pittsburgh in the first round, and I think I'll stop making any sort of prediction after that.
What's the matter? You don't want to make predictions?
No.
That's ever failed for you before?
Exactly. My predictions are always pretty bad. So I'll, especially when it comes to picking playoff series. So I think that will be a pretty spectacular series. I'm curious to see how long Evgeny Malkin's going to be out with this sudden week to week injury that he's got. And just generally speaking, I feel like the Penguins are ripe for something. They're starting to show some cracks. Matt Murray's a fantastic playoff goalie. I'm curious to see how the Islanders goalies are situated, even going into the playoffs, and then how they perform in that advanced stage. And if it is Pittsburgh, how they perform facing down the likes of Crosby and Letang and Kessel and those guys who won so much. But I think it's not a bad matchup for the Islanders. I think they can frustrate a skilled team like Pittsburgh in a 7-game series, much the way they did in 2013, but they just didn't have the good goaltending to back it up.
Well, it seems like they have all the things that will make a like you said, interesting playoff series and beyond potentially. So I'm excited. I'm sure you are too. It's going to be fun to write about. It's going to be fun to watch. It's going to be fun to talk about. And hopefully we can do this again in the future here. It's always fun when you come on. So I thank you for your time. Hopefully you continue to pump out some good stuff over there at The Athletic. Why don't you let us know where everybody can follow your stuff as much as they probably already know?
Well, you can get the Athletic app and subscribe. We do have free trials of a week, I believe, to check it out if you're not a subscriber, and on Twitter at Stape Athletic. Always bringing bad music and plenty of sarcasm to the table.
Not bad music. Come on. You got to give yourself a little more credit. If there's anything you have to give yourself credit for, it's your takes on music, because they're always pretty solid.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
Anytime, Art. Again, I appreciate your time. Thanks for coming on. This is the Isles Faithful Podcast. You could find us on Google, Podbean, Stitcher, Apple, all those crazy different things there. We're on Facebook. We're on Twitter at Faithful Isles. You can follow me at Isles Blogger. This has been episode 28. I am your host, Michael Sherline. As always, thanks for listening. Let's go Islanders.